How's it, everyone? Welcome to another Racket review right here on OpenCourt. So I know I'm a little late to the party, but I finally got my hands on the newest racket by Wilson, the Wilson Wlabs Project Shift, or just the Wilson Shift for short. So I got both the 300 and 315 versions here. So I'm going to be comparing these two rackets and reviewing them for you guys today on this video. So before we get into this review, I just have a quick announcement to make. I wanted to let you guys know that I started a Patreon page for this channel. As most of you guys know, I am a one-man show. I do all of the videos, shooting, editing, and everything on my own. All the equipment I review for you guys comes straight out of my own pocket, and tennis, as you guys know, can get quite expensive. So I started this Patreon page in hopes of raising the funds to get more equipment to review for you guys, including the latest rackets and strings. So if you guys are interested, check out my Patreon page. I'll leave the link down in the description below. I appreciate all of your guys' continued support. So this new racket by Wilson called the Shift, developed by the Wlabs, has a patent-pending racket profile, and the marketing behind this new racket deals with what they call lateral bending plus torsional stability. In a way, it's kind of similar to the way that the Wilson Clash line markets its flexing technology. It's supposed to bend a little bit differently than other rackets on the market. This Wilson Shift is also supposed to do that in the sense of lateral bending. So what is torsional stability? Torsional stability is when you swing horizontally in this axis on ground strokes or volleys. When your racket makes contact with the ball, if you hit off center, it actually twists a little bit in your hand this way. Whereas the lateral bending has to do more with the recent trend of the modern tennis game of swinging more vertically to impart spin. The Shift aims to bridge the gap between torsional stability and that lateral bending to provide that perfect combination of spin, power, and control and stability. So let's take a quick look at the specs of the Wilson Shift. There's two versions, the 300 and the 315. So obviously the biggest difference is the weight. The 300 gram one and the 315 gram one also have different string patterns. The lighter version has a 16 by 20, which is a pretty good string pattern for many players because that 20 cross strings will give you a little more control. The 1820 on the heavier version also makes this a more advanced frame. The other difference is there aren't too many same beam width, same balance. The flex though is pretty interesting. It's rated at a 67 RA, which is higher than I expected. I thought this racket was going to be a little bit more flexy, a little more bendy like the Clash. But the Clash series has a much lower RA, so I'm actually interested to see how stiff this racket actually is when I get it on the court. So let's get on the court with the Wilson Shifts, the 300 and 315, see how they play and see what the differences are. All right, I'm starting out with the slightly lighter 300 one, and so far, wow, just from these first few hits, the response is not what I was expecting. I said that this racket has a unique, like, flex design, kind of like the Clash, but so far this feels nothing like the Clash. It actually feels pretty stiff. It's not flexing the same way that the Clash does. Oh, but the response is solid. Yeah, it's a very stiff, solid feel, which I tend to like, but for some reason this racket actually feels kind of muted. Man, it swings really fast though, the 300. I typically like something a little heavier, but it actually feels pretty good. The launch angle is really high for a 1620. Whoa, geez, yeah. I'm not seeing too much spin from this racket. It's kind of launching high and not really coming back down as much. Maybe if you're more of a Western grip topspin hitter, you can get more spin than me, but I tend to swing in more of a line. Okay, let's switch it up. I got the 315 version now. So this one is a 1820 pattern compared to the 300 1620. And already I can feel there's a huge drop off in power. Even though it's the same head size at 99, this one is nowhere near as powerful. I actually have to really swing. Maybe if you hit more flat, but even then it's not really that powerful. It's hard to tell exactly what to do with this racket. It does have good control though if you really swing out. If you're a more aggressive hitter, I think this can benefit you, but so far, I think I like the 300 better. I usually don't like rackets that light, but that one is a little bit easier to swing. The balance is a little bit easier to get around. Even though it's the same balance, this is 15 grams heavier. I just really got to swing with this racket and I'm getting tired. But the response is solid. It's muted but solid. It's kind of weird, but I actually kind of like it. But there's a big difference between the 300 and 315, even if it's just the weight and string pattern. So I'd like to give my thoughts on this new Wilson Shift racket. Let's start with the power level. The power level was decent, but it was actually not as good as I expected from a 23.5mm beam. The 300 version definitely gives a little bit more free power. Usually a heavier racket will provide more power because there is more weight behind every shot. But in this case, the lighter 300 Shift provided more free power because of the slightly more open pattern and faster swing feel. The power was most noticeable for me on the serves. My favorite shot was the serve with the 300. I could hit powerful flat serves that easily cleared the net. I could also hit my slice serves with some decent pace that ran away from or into the body of my opponent. Both rackets are very solid and stable at net and had good put away power on high volleys, overheads, and anything around my chest level. I could punch volleys back deep, even the low volleys. The assistance in power made hitting anything below my knees easier than it should have been. The ground strokes is where I expected more power than I actually got. The 300 Shift has a pretty open 20 cross string pattern and swings faster, so it has decent power on ground strokes, but the 315 Shift with the 1820 pattern did not provide as much free power as I was hoping. The Speed Pro with the same string pattern provides more power from the frame than the Shift. All in all, the power level is decent, but I expected a little more from this thicker frame. Next up is the spin. The spin level on both of these rackets, especially the 315 with its tighter pattern, is really nothing to write home about. Neither of these rackets are built with much spin technology in its frame. I really struggled to produce spin with the 315 version. My kick serves became sitters and my opponents smacked them back straight at my feet. On topspin ground strokes, the 300 version is definitely better at bringing the ball down inside the court. The 20 crosses are actually fairly open, so the mains slide and produce decent topspin. The 300 produces much better kick on kick serves because of the more open pattern and the lighter overall weight. The 315 strings are really tight together, so they don't have that last second dive on topspin shots. Although the 315 has a lower launch angle, I still struggled to keep aggressive shots inside the court. It was a little disappointing because I also couldn't clear the net consistently with the 315 unless I swung out. It's always important to keep a loose grip and come around the waist when hitting forehands, but it's especially important with the Shift rackets as they will not help much in keeping the ball inside the lines with spin. Slice shots were fine but not great. The thicker beam and the weight and balance of the Shift makes the racket not as aerodynamic as other thinner frames. My slices tended to fly high over the net rather than staying low and skidding. Pushing through on the slice swings is necessary to keep slices low with the Shift. Next up, the comfort. This is actually kind of interesting. This frame actually feels pretty stiff, but it's also kind of muted, which is a very strange feeling for me. It doesn't really feel like anything else out on the market. The Shift is not an uncomfortable racket by any means. In fact, I felt barely any vibrations in my wrist or elbow when I struck the ball off center. So if you have arm issues, I think the Shift will do a good job of protecting your arm, but not as much as the Clash. The Clash's flex makes the racket very bendy and absorbs shock much better. The Shift feels a little more boardy. It doesn't feel like it pockets the ball as well as the Clash or other flexier rackets. In terms of comfort, the Shift is good, but the feel is what kind of threw me for a loop. We'll get into that in a bit. Next up is the control. This is the category that I think the Wilson Shift really shines in, especially that tighter pattern on the 315. You really have to swing out. In fact, I think this racket encourages you to swing out because of that good control with its stiff feeling. The 300 has more free power, but it has decent control. I struggled with the high launch of the 300 though, but overall, it is a decent control racket. I think the 300 is more well balanced when it comes to power, spin, and control. The 315 version is strictly a control racket with little help in power and spin. The 315 will suit big hitters because the trajectory and power level is low and the racket is fairly stiff. It doesn't feel like it has much flex and ball pocketing, so the ball feels like it loses kinetic energy when it hits the string bed. I especially like the control of the 315 on forehand returns. This is my most aggressive shot. I like to redirect the power of my opponent's serve and send it back deep. The 315 made it easy to do this. In fact, I really had to swing with this racket to put any kind of pressure on my opponent. I'm not really a big hitting baseliner, so the 315 is not quite for me. It feels a lot different from my 1820 Speed Pro. It actually feels closer to the Gravity Pro because they are both low-powered, less spin-oriented, and have muted feels. Although the 300 and 315 have differing levels of control from the baseline, both editions have great control on serve and volley. Even the more powerful 300 version, I could still place my shots close to the lines and corners. On volleys, I never struggled with sailing the ball long, although I did hit a few volleys in the net where I didn't punch the volley enough. So good control on both versions, although the 300 has a much higher launch angle and the 315 version requires more of a full swing from the user. Next is the feel. This goes a little bit hand in hand with the comfort because of that impact response, but I said earlier that this frame is a unique design, kind of like the Clash, but this feels nothing like the Wilson Clash line. Because of the muted feel, I sometimes struggled to feel exactly where I was hitting on the string bed on full strokes and aggressive volleys. Interestingly though, touch shots like drop shots and angle volleys felt decent because although the feel is muted, the response is pretty stiff, so I got a fair amount of impact feedback. I didn't quite feel confident from the baseline because crisper rackets and strings give me confidence on full strokes because it gives me the illusion that I'm hitting harder than I actually am. I think the Shift would play better with a crisp and responsive poly setup to give the user confidence from the baseline. But overall, I enjoyed the Shift more at the net than the baseline because I had more touch and feel on my front court shots than on ground strokes. Some other things I just wanted to mention that I noticed throughout this playtest. Both of these rackets, even the lighter 300, felt a little bit sluggish when I was swinging it through the air, especially on the ground strokes. The weight and balance didn't really complement my playstyle that much, so I definitely want a little bit more headlight feel and not feel quite as sluggish because whenever I took half swings, I dumped the ball straight into the net. And lastly, I just want to mention that this pearlescent color of the Wilson Shift, this is not the official paint job that's going to be released. That's going to be released later on this year, probably in a different color. This is a prototype from what I've heard. So lastly, let's discuss who the new Wilson Shift rackets are for. The 315 version is definitely for more advanced players who like to swing away from the baseline and like a more dead feel so they can keep swinging from the baseline without fear of sending the ball long. The 300 version has a broader audience. If you have slower swings or are more of a serve and volleyer, the 300 is probably a better choice. I personally like the 300 version better, which surprised me because I usually don't like 300 gram rackets that much. They're a bit too light, little less in control like the Pure Drive, Pure Arrow, or even the Speed MP. But this 300 was more well-rounded and more customizable to suit my needs. Serve and volley came much more naturally and it didn't have as sluggish of a feel on my ground strokes. So this new Shift line was very interesting. If you've tried it, let me know if you also felt the same thing in terms of the stiff but muted feel because it felt pretty unique and there's not much like it on the market currently. So Wilson Shift, new racket by Wilson. Let me know what you guys think about this brand new racket line. Thank you for watching this review of the new Wilson Shift rackets right here on OpenCourt. Be sure to check out my Patreon page if you're interested in supporting this channel. If you guys like this content, be sure to overhead smash that like and subscribe button to keep the reviews coming, and I'll see you on an OpenCourt.